Life is too short for bad books is a quote that's associated with James Joyce and may be his single decent contribution to the field of literature. Now, my channel's not a really good example of upholding this idea considering what I read, but I do try to fit in some good books in between all of the terrible that I read. The problem is I try to branch out a lot and try to find new authors and new stories. Lately I've been trying to get into genres and franchises that I don't normally pick up. Like right now I'm reading This Is How You Lose the Time War and The Fall of Cadia. And like 3 of the books at the same time. I've got a problem. And sometimes I do find something I really enjoy. For example, I have been loving the Elden Ring manga. But there are plenty of books where I'll start reading it and then I'll put it down for one reason or another. Maybe I'm not connecting with the characters, maybe the story's just not really sinking in. Like, I've got this test that I play around with some books where if I'm not really getting into it, I'll put it down for an extended period of time. And if I don't feel a compulsion to go back to it, I don't bother, and it just gets added to my do not finish or DNF pile. Like this one, I actually pulled this one out of storage a little while ago, Vertical Run by Joseph Garber. It's got a good premise, kind of Die Hard-esque, where the protagonist goes into work one day and all of a sudden everybody wants to try to kill him. His boss, his best friend, even his wife. And he's being hunted down by mercenaries at the same time. So it's like, what did this guy do? Why this change all of a sudden? And it has something to do with his past, but the further into the story you go, the less he gets challenged on things, and then it becomes pretty obvious the protagonist is a Gary Stu, and I didn't want to really bother getting back into it. And it has been a while since I've picked this up. You can tell I didn't clean this on purpose just so you could see, but there's a lot of dust on this. So I thought it might be fun if we went over 5 books that I didn't quit just because they weren't catching my attention, but because they were actively bothering me about something. Stories that weren't bad enough to get the full tab treatment, but also weren't good enough to bother finishing. And to keep things interesting and a little more fair, I decided to pick books that were supposed to be bestsellers or were from best-selling authors or award winners. And I'll admit we're starting off a little shakily because I'm not like 100% done with this one. I might try to go forward with it, but the problems with it are they bother me on a really basic level, and that is John Scalzi's Redshirts. I will start off by saying this isn't an awful book. Redshirts, as the title implies, is a story about Star Trek redshirts. The classic trope being that redshirts just die so haphazardly. Well, this is a story, a parody, told from the perspective of a redshirt. And not just that, it's one who starts to notice that the ship that he's just been assigned is a little weird when it comes to away missions, as well as culture on the ship in general. There are certain kind of impossibilities. There's actually a really good scene early on where one of the bridge crew approaches him. He works in like the science department, and Lieutenant Kerensky is infected with like a flesh-eating bacteria or something, and he needs to come up with they call it a counter-bacterial. It's nonsense, of course, but he's got 6 hours to do it, and the protagonist looks at him and is like, 6 hours? Basic testing is going to take me weeks at least. What are you talking about? The other members of the science department like wheel out this thing called the box. The box is basically magic because they put a viral sample into it, and like 5.5 hours later, it goes ding, and then there are results, just like magic. And rather than email the results to the bridge, the protagonist has to run up there himself. So it's making fun of a lot of the tropiness of old Star Trek shows, and I think there's a lot of potential there. There's also a lot of good lines. This book made me laugh several times, but I just cannot get over how lazily some of these scenes were constructed. But there are 2 main problems that this book suffers from. The first one being white room syndrome. Very rarely are scenes or settings given any sort of description. For the most part, what you get is a broad description of what a thing is, like they're in the lab, they're in a suite, they're in the mess hall, and then that's it. That's the end of the explanation. Look, I get that a lot of the book's comedy relies on you understanding the tropes of Star Trek, but to then rely on the audience to fill in the gaps for scene setting, That just strikes me as lazy. And it's prevalent. You could ask 10 different people what the science lab is supposed to look like, and you'll get 10 different results. And I doubt they'll be even close. Like, what kind of equipment do they have? Where are the computers set up? Do they even have tables? What color are the walls? What is the material on the floor? Nothing. There are no answers for any of that. And the other problem comes down to the characterization. Now, when I read a book, characters and universe are the most important elements. That is what gets me into the story. And you've got some characters, perhaps too many of them. In the first 50 pages, you are introduced to 18 primary characters who all seem to have varying levels of importance for the story going forward. And it's tragic because I'm not counting everybody in that list, because there are a number of people who are like, oh yeah, Bob, he died last week on an away mission. Like, if you were to drop every single name, there's more than like 25 people mentioned in the first 50 pages of this book. So not only do they not really have a lot of space in order to stand out or be given any real characterization, but oftentimes they're introduced 2 or 3 at a time. So it makes it that much harder to differentiate person A from person B from person C, etc. And it also doesn't help that a lot of the names sound the same. For example, the protagonist is a guy called Dahl, and very early on, he's introduced to another ensign who is being assigned to the ship, named Duval. And then there are the other ensigns, Hester and Hansen. If you're just reading through this not very carefully, it is very easy to miss characters' names or confuse them for somebody else and just lose track of who's talking. Like, I just put this one down. I don't want to say that I'm completely done with it, but I'm probably done with it. And I got 68 pages into this one. But at least that's some progress, because some premises sound really good, but then when you actually sit down to check them out, the execution is abysmal. And so you buy a book, you take it home, and you don't even make it 10 pages in. That was my experience with Incidents Around the House. Now, like I said, the premise of this didn't sound that bad. It's the story of a haunted house told from the perspective of a little girl, which I think has a lot of potential as a story. I mean, kids are young, they're inexperienced, they might not be able to explain all of the strange phenomena that's going on around them, so it's going to be that much harder for them to actually get any help. And at the start of the book, the protagonist, her name is Bella, she's already familiar with this other ghost and refers to her as Other Mommy. And the prose is all told first person, so we're able to get directly into her head, and she talks like this. Mommy only left for work 10 minutes ago, but Dado already calls to me. Dado comes up the stairs. Other Mommy steps into my bathroom. The kids at school say I'm lucky that I have a bathroom connected to my bedroom. So the prose is given in these choppy, messy sentences. The dialogue is given blunt force trauma. You don't even get any quotes. It's really just back and forth, where it's not really a guessing game of who's talking, because it's pretty obvious from the word choice, but it feels a little scattered, kind of ADHD in that way. And this would work if Bella wasn't supposed to be 8 years old. Like, I got to page 9, the start of chapter 4, and she does not sound like an 8-year-old. Look, I've got a nephew. He sounded like this when he was 3. So, like, I don't know if this is supposed to be like a flash forward start where in these scenes she's supposed to be 3 or 4, but then you get, I don't know, to chapter 10 or something, and all of a sudden she's 8, like what is described in the front cover. But if she's supposed to be 8 in these first few chapters, the characterization's already escaped the author. He's done a terrible job trying to get into her headspace, and she does not sound like she's 8. This next one is like really tragic for me, just because I happen to really like this author, and I think she's been falling off in some of her recent titles. And this was the start of it. Ruth Ware's 0 Days. Now, like I said, I love Ruth Ware's work. The Death of Mrs. Westaway, The Woman in Cabin 10, The It Girl, The Turn of the Key. This has one of the best openings to a book I've ever read. And 0 Days starts out pretty strong. It's about this husband and wife duo. They do like security testing for buildings and cybersecurity, things like that. It's a real job. And the wife is the physical security aspect of the duo, where she tries to break in and like plant flash drives in server farms and things like that just to see if she can. The husband is the computer IT side of everything, and he does the hacking portion of whatever they need. Well, they're doing one of these, and the book opens with one of these scenes where they're working together to break into this facility. By the time the wife gets back, her name is Jack, by the way, her husband has been murdered in their home. And they're very security conscious. They've got all sorts of physical security, cameras, things like that. So the real mystery is not only who killed her husband, but how. A problem which is compounded by the fact that the police suspect that Jack is the perpetrator. Made even worse by the fact that Jack has a personal relationship with the cop who is investigating her, and he was an abusive ex-boyfriend. So it's got a lot going for it, except the excitement of those initial few chapters dies away and then stays dead for about a quarter of the book, because the story comes down to not Jack investigating the crime, but Jack simply slipping away from the police, which is an important step in the story. I'm not begrudging that concept. It's just, after a while, there is just this massive lull in the story as Jack is going from place to place to place, not even picking up clues or trying to track down leads. Like, she cuts her hair, she gets some money from her sister, she stays in a hostel. And if these were spread out a little bit more, as she was following a lead or something, maybe that could have worked. But as it is, I just got so bored after a while. And normally, Ware is able to weave in interesting characters, very detailed and like purposefully placed characters into her story. But for a good length of chapters, it's really just Jack on her own, not really interacting with anybody, not building off of anybody, not trading dialogue that much. I mean, she runs into a few people she knows, like I said, her sister, and she runs into an old colleague within the section that I got to, but it all felt so minimal. And after a while, just picking up the book just to trudge through another chapter, I realized I wasn't having fun with this one, so I just put it down for a little while, and I'm a little curious to the answer to the mystery, but at the same time, I'd rather just look it up and just find a spoiler online, because it feels like less of a hassle. And I think when you get to that point, it's time to just put the book down and move on to something else. But at least that one had a degree of pedigree with the author. At least 0 Days started off with a good premise and a good couple of chapters. This next one, the story never even started, and I'm talking about Aaron Morganson's The Night Circus. Now, this one was an award winner or something with NaNoWriMo, before the scandal. And it's about this circus that takes place at night. And it turns out that magic is real. And you've got a good setting for something to happen, and nothing happens. There's this weird contest that this one wizard and witch are having with their kids. It's like they're not married or anything. It's like two warring families or something. And those kids are what I think the story's supposed to be around, as they've got some sort of a romance or an attempt at a romance. But the characterization is really flat. There's not much going on there. And even the premise of the Night Circus itself isn't really utilized for the story. Now, there's talk about it, because there are these scenes where characters are talking about setting up the Night Circus, but that's all we get. Set up. At least as far as what I got, and I was like 340 pages in, so a little bit more than halfway through this. Like, I can't say that the prose itself is bad. The sentence variety is good, the scene composition is good, it's just that the characters don't do anything and everything feels so uneventful. My wife tried reading this and she came to the same conclusion. Nothing happens! And she's even more dogged than I am when it comes to finishing books. Like, I'll put something down if it doesn't catch my interest, but once she opens a book, she has to finish it. Eventually. But not this time. This one we've both given up on. And the other thing is, it's interspersed with the occasional chapter that's told from second-person perspective as it describes how you, yourself, are going to the Night Circus. Which is not a bad concept. How often do you actually see second-person perspective being used? But I'm sorry, how am I supposed to be interested in a tepid romance between two pieces of cardboard while people talk about the logistics of setting up a circus? Like, I don't want to talk about the paperwork or expanding a guest list or picking a location for the circus to, like, set everything up. You know, circuses are about elephants on parade, jugglers performing tricks on the trapeze, clowns on fire. And we might get that eventually near the end of the book, but you've got to do a lot of work to get there, and it is not worth it. But sometimes you don't have a good premise. Sometimes you don't start off with anything interesting. Sometimes I'm just in the mood for something stupid that I know is going to be stupid, and I'm curious to see how it plays off, because it might still be fun. The Room and Samurai Cop are garbage tier movies, and they're still fun to watch because of how inept they are.
You son of a bitch! Come back here, you motherfucker!
But sometimes a premise is too stupid, but still tries to take itself seriously, and in doing so, the internal logic of everything just collapses internally. And that is the problem I had with Frida McFadden's Ward D. I did not know who Frida McFadden was when I picked this up. I was just wandering through Barnes & Noble. They had a whole bunch of her books on one end shelf, and I'm thinking, okay, she's, given the state of literature these days, probably not great, but probably sells well. Now, I will say this, like I said, I didn't know this when I bought the book, but there's a bit of controversy behind her. There are accusations that she uses AI to write her books because she'll churn them out very, very quickly. I don't know if that's true. I haven't looked that deep into it. I have the one, and it's not good. She's not a talented writer. She might be a good person, because apparently she's a nurse in real life, and I think that's awesome. But that expertise does not carry through in Ward D, which is also set in a hospital. It's not just a hospital, it's a mental health unit. And think about every single trope that you can in regards to horror stories or thrillers regarding mental health wards. Whatever you thought of is probably in here. Now, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief for the sake of the story, but there's a limit. And unfortunately, this book's setup is so stupid that it immediately defies any sense of logic, and therefore it ruins the immersion and any thrills you may have as a result. So the story is, you've got Amy. She is a med student, and she has to do a shift at Ward D, something with her classes, which I don't know how true that is, but whatever. I won't bother questioning that for now. There's worse to come. You see, what she's got to do while she's in this ward is she needs to interview some of the patients in order to understand their condition and write a report on it. Okay, fine, that feels a little faulty, but whatever. Now, the real question is, why is she doing this at night? And I don't mean she gets there at like 2 in the afternoon and has to stay till 10 or midnight or whatever. She gets there in the evening. She's starting this report, and this is by assignment. She didn't show up late. She was told to show up in the evening. So she is interviewing people during a period of time where they would normally be asleep. I think her teacher hates her. And of course, it's in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, so the cell phones don't work. There's that one homicidal guy who's locked up in the padded room, but oh, it's okay. He'll never get out of there. Wink. The only other people on staff are another med student that Amy has a history with, a disinterested nurse, and the supervising physician, who spends most of his time in his office. And everyone, like all of the patients, are on guard because they're convinced that the guy in the padded room is going to get out that night and start murdering everybody. And you have a long series of attempted cliffhangers where we get these jump scare endings to the chapters where, in one example, One of the patients, I forget what what his condition was, but he gets out of his room. The patients were allowed to wander because they're all sealed inside of a main perimeter. And he approaches Amy and the disinterested nurse naked and covered in blood. And that's how the chapter ends. And then it is immediately dismissed at the start of the next chapter because it turns out he's just covered in jelly. So you get all of these fake jump scares for a good portion of the start of the book, along with scenes from Amy's mysterious past, because she may be schizophrenic. But I got about halfway through this book. I'm on chapter 30 here, page 165, and there was just nothing going on. Like in terms of things actually happening. A lot of build-up, a lot of attempts at suspense, but nothing actually permanent. No one, by the point I get into the story, no one is confirmed as hurt. I suspect that the other med student is dead, but again, that hasn't been confirmed. Spoiler warning, by the way. So again, it's a lot of build-up, it's a lot of attempts at suspense, and it's a slog to get through after a while. Like, the prose isn't bad, but the logic isn't there. Like, everything is so clearly staged in the dumbest way possible in order to artificially build up the thrills. I'm actually surprised this book wasn't set on Friday the 13th. So I wanted to save this one for last because I might go over it with some tabs and, give this a proper full review, if there's enough demand for it, because McFadden's getting movie deals now, because in modern Hollywood, sales are more important than good storytelling. So those are just 5 books from my DNF pile. I wanted to put something together because I haven't posted a video in a very long while. Life has been a touch hectic lately, but I thought this might make for a fun short video. But have you read any of those books, or do you have any opinions on any of those titles or authors? If so, comment on it below. I'm curious what other people think, or if my interpretations of these stories are off. Or let me know if there are any other topics you want me to talk about, like any recent controversies regards to writing or entertainment in general, or any other book topics you want me to talk about, like favorite books. I would make a video on my TBR pile, except that makes up about half of my house. Anyway, once I'm done editing this video, I'm going to jump into filming for Age of Scorpius, and you'll have something to look forward to in February-ish, hopefully.